Hello, my name is Jeremy Elder. I'm a staff product designer on the Foundations team at GitLab, and I'm excited to walk through the result of the design tokens planning session that the Foundations team has been working on. So we did an async exercise that worked through some planning with alignment around the current situation, project goals, definition of done risks, and a few iterations of a plan to arrive at the plan that I'll walk through now. So uh, first up, though, if you are unfamiliar with design tokens or want to learn more about the concepts behind it or how we're thinking about it at GitLab, I encourage you to go over to Pajamas, Foundations, and then there is a design tokens page dedicated to design tokens. We have a little bit of a preamble of why we use them, and hint, we are using them today in a limited capacity for certain things. So we do use them today, but we're going to be using them to a greater extent. And then there's some placeholder sections here for documentation yet to be determined. That is all covered in part of our plan. Also, I put together a UX showcase on design tokens a few months ago that you could watch through and learn more about it. There's a resource there. Also, there is an easel and arc that I can post in the uh, description of the epic here so that you have all those resources on hand, including the FigJam file. So I want to jump into the plan and walk through a few different pieces of it. I'm going to do so at a relatively high level and just dig down on a few aspects of it. A lot of bullet points under here, so I'd encourage you to take a look at the FigJam file and dig more into that, comment, ask questions, etc. There's a few phases to this. There's a pilot phase, product readiness phase, product integration, and at the far right, dark mode and complete tokenization. I don't want to get too caught up in the thought of dark mode. It's a ways out. There's a lot of ground to cover ahead of time, and I think you'll see why as I jump into this. However, I did want to highlight that because ultimately, design tokens, one of their benefits is it's going to unlock our ability to do dark mode, I think in a very effective and meaningful way. But not only dark mode, we don't want to limit it to that. There's many other things that design tokens will enable us to do. However, we know that this is um, a very much sought after feature and capability. And so we want to be able to streamline our efforts towards that, but at the same time, focus on tokenization as a concept in general and really nail that down and how we want to work with tokens at GitLab. So first off, I'm going to jump into the current situation and then get through the rest of that. So the foundations team identified that and validated that we do have a need for design tokens and that tokens will satisfy some of the asks that we are hoping to deliver on. We've started to document our definition and approach while identifying some gaps. That's what I've noted over there in the Pajama site. We are testing tooling and workflows almost on a daily basis. So that might be Figma with the variables feature or in GitLab UI. There are, as I mentioned, some primitive tokens already being used in GitLab UI. When I say primitive, just think of simple key value pairs. Think of a color, gray 500 being tied to a certain hex value. So basically the root level of what we would consider a token. And lastly, we're aligned on the need for a functional proof of concept or pilot. And I think pilot is a better term for our next phase here. And thank you, Dan, for highlighting that. The reason for that is because we've done several proof of concepts at a lower level, but now we want to really pilot this from design through product implementation and tackle that at a larger level. So let's hop into the pilot. The pilot scope is limited to text color tokens. So there are three of those that we would consider working with at this point. And those would be taking those from primitives to semantic tokens to products. So think about taking text, or not text, gray 900, mapping that to text primary as a semantic token, and then being able to leverage that in the product. That's what this pilot aims to do. And as part of that, it goes to the entire workflow so that we can capture uh, documentation and naming decisions and et cetera, all along that whole path, and really round that out and learn from it. So there's three parts to that. Like I said, I'm not going to go into each bullet point, but there is two demos and then some documentation that we would work on. First up, a Figma demo. So cover the entire workflow, uh, determine our file architecture, how tokens are synced between GitLab UI, etc. GitLab UI likewise create a demo of the ecosystem, address things like namespacing and output, and also syncing uh, with Figma. And then a documentation piece, have some drafts created that really start to fill out these sections over here in pajamas for the types of tokens we have, the conventions, the format, their use, etc. So work on drafts of those MRs to get that those things and those conventions in place. All right. So then, as an output of that, we would have functional demos. We would have a general alignment on the process and documentation, and the product would be consuming these text colors. So this is all part of the pilot, part of that phase we'd be working through, and then there's the validation piece of that. And there's two angles for that. The first is the designer experience, and the second is the engineer experience. So, from a designer experience, it would be considering, well, I should back up here. For both of these, it's considering the workflow and the process, it's understanding general concepts about tokens and the tooling that designers and engineers are using, and it's ensuring that documentation is clear and comprehensive. But there's two other points that are maybe worth expounding on a little bit more, and that is easier design decisions and easier implementation. These are things we really want to validate because part of uh, the intentionality behind using design tokens is to codify design decisions and really make those decisions easier to work with, easier to understand, and understand the intentionality behind it. And so for example, today you might choose, as a designer, you might choose gray 900 to apply to a text layer, and that's a bit arbitrary. I mean, there may or may not be a reason you choose that color among the dozens that are available. But as part of this, if we limited it down to three options, maybe text primary, text secondary, text tertiary, all of a sudden we've started to capture a design decision in that where, okay, I'm working with primary text here. I want to choose this variable because that's going to assign the correct styles, the the correct color that I need for this. And so when I say style there, I just meant color. So we're wanting to apply that, and so that's an easier decision rather than choosing from dozens of things. I just know, okay, I need primary text. Oh, it's this. Great. That semantic token maps back to a primitive, uh, but I don't have to know what that hex value is or what color step I'm selecting. I just need to know that that's primary text and that's what I want it to look like. Same with engineering and implementation. If there's a utility that instead of a gray 900 utility, if it's text primary as a utility or whatnot, it's going to be much easier to apply. So we want to validate that experience and indeed ensure that the naming conventions and the structure that we've set out to create and work with indeed makes decisions easier and increases efficacy for those decisions. So from there, we would iterate on demos and drafts and continue to work on design and engineering alignment on the direction. So working with stable counterparts and whatnot, and then iterate on that. Go back to the demos and drafts, go back to the documentation, and continue to work through this, validate that the product is consuming it correctly, etc. So that would close out the pilot. From there, we would move on to product readiness, which is still limited to GitLab UI and the Pajamas UI kit. But from there, we would take all colors, tokenize them, and have global component semantic color tokens. And these would be available for both designers and engineers. So in the Pajamas UI kit and in GitLab UI. And that would be all colors. So just limiting it to that. Uh, and as part of this phase, deliverables would be uh, in four different areas. So the pajamas UI kit, GitLab UI, documentation, and training. For the UI kit specifically, we would ensure that everything is published and available, that components and elements are using these color tokens, that the decisions are clear, and designers are able to more accurately and efficiently select what they need at the point of use. For GitLab UI, we make sure that components are consuming the color tokens and that utility classes are generated from color tokens, that we have the right semantic layers and whatnot in place. Documentation, we would ensure completeness uh, for colored tokens and pajamas, for token use in GitLab UI, and then Figma would have necessary demos, sticker sheets, instances, etc., available for designers to reference. And then lastly is a bit of the training aspect of it and communication strategy. So video walkthroughs, sync sessions, open office hours, anything that we can do to help support the effort. Uh, in regards to communication strategy, that would be how is somebody going to get um, is it a push pull method? Do I have to go to Slack and find this out? Do I have to go to a release notes, or do I open up my Figma file and I see that there's an update that I need to do? How are we handling the communication around updates and use cases and changes? And then a migration path plan where, similar to how we do components today and we plan the migrations, we do that also the for the tokens. All right. So an end state here would look like having initial color token work complete. The decisions, guides, processes would be documented for the different tools and touch points. Designers would be working with the latest token-based system, and tokens would be migration ready. So next up would be product integration. So this would be where color tokens would be used in the product without visual regression. And we would handle and look at component migrations, component updates, utility color classes, page level overrides. So all of the things necessary to ensure that the product has a single source of truth for tokens, and that whatever we're doing has throughput, and that whatever we're doing can propagate in the product so that uh, that users can actually obtain the value out of the tokens. So as part of that, we would have a certain percentage of coverage in the product. We don't know what that is today or what that looks like. I don't think it'd be 100%, but I would assume it would be pretty high coverage. But we understand that there are going to be edge cases or things that we might not be able to address easily or readily, or that might be lower impact. And so we'd want to be able to know those edge cases and have a plan to address them and work through that. And so product integration, like it's probably it's one of the shortest things in here, but actually quite an effort when we consider all the components that need to be migrated, all the changes that need to happen, simply for the product to have a single source of truth for styling, just from a color standpoint alone. And so that's where it splits into two different paths now, and that is the dark mode and complete tokenization. So if we're talking specifically for color, we can look at dark mode and the effort for that. And there's quite an effort. There's a lot of ground to cover before we would see the output of this in the product. And so I want to highlight a few of those things that it's just on our minds that would need to be done to really to see tokens extend into something like dark UI. They enable it, but they don't deliver on it without these other things being in place. The first of that is design exploration. So we need the principles around this. We need color exploration. We need to consider accessibility and other modes, so that we are really effectively thinking through how color should be used and how it should translate from one mode to the next. A UI kit updates got to determine what will be supported for modes and themes, determine designer workflows, how they're working with the tooling itself. A large one is design process itself. So determining how and when designers should work with different modes, like what is the default in a design file, what changes with user testing, like are we testing a dark uh, exploration, or are we testing a light exploration? Are we testing both? Like, when do we do either? We would, explore what changes with handoff, what kind of design spec or deliverable is out there. Uh, and then lastly, in design process, what changes with QA and like visual regression testing? What is our source of truth? What are we testing against? In GitLab UI, determining the token structure, so how we'll handle mode switching, and determining if any additional tokens need to be created, and how we'd work through that. QA, determining how visual regression testing will be handled, and what will be used just for manual QA and validation. Like, where does that come from? What are we comparing to? What are we working up against? And lastly, the UX side of things. So none of this would have any value if the user wasn't able to use it effectively and as expected. And so we need to do a process to look at the current user settings and the structure of that. Today it's just themes. That's all we have. But we would need to consider OS level settings, independent theme settings, and how to decouple the alpha dark mode that exists today. And that theme, it's as a theme, how to separate that from a mode which might be at a more OS level. So a lot of work to cover there. As an output of that, designers would have what they need to effectively know when and how to work in the modes. We'd be ready to update user settings and sunset the current dark mode alpha, pun intended, I think. And then GitLab UI updates would support modes. One more thing over here. That is that users would be able to effectively and reliably change those settings. So when they go into their user settings, it's what they would expect to be able to change this. And then last but not least, by any means, would be complete tokenization. So everything to this point has been in regards to color. And this would be complete tokenization. So it would move beyond just color to adjust all primitives, all semantic and component tokens. So spacing, anything, you name it. It would all be covered at this point so that we have a full and more robust coverage for tokens. And some deliverables there would be, again, making sure that the UI kit has what designers need, making sure that GitLab UI has what engineers need and what the product can consume, making sure that documentation is complete for all different types of tokens, and likewise training, make sure it supports all of that. And then lastly, again, more component migrations, updates, utility classes, and page level overrides. So addressing all of that in order to have a full token effect. So that is our plan as it stands today. Again, the main focus of this right now is specifically on the design tokens piece, and that's why there's kind of this divide here between anything to do with just simply design tokens and the extension of them, which would result in dark mode and complete tokenization. Um, this is going to be it's quite an effort, and we wanted to highlight all the pieces that we foresee going into that. And so, if you have any questions, by all means, let us know in Slack or in this epic. I'll also post the resources that I shared via Pajamas, the UX Showcase, and anything else that comes to mind. But I thank you for your time, and I'm excited to work on this and to bring it to fruition. So, thank you for your time.